Chris, thank you very much for joining us on Trade Finance Talks TV.
Thank you for having me.
So, to start off with, in no more than 30 seconds, who are you, where are you from, and what do you do?
So, Chris Hall, I am an Executive Director at Willis Watson, so that's the insurance broker. And my role is interacting with financial institutions. In terms of an ITFA context, I'm the head of regions at ITFA. And before I moved to Willis, I was an insurance underwriter at Liberty and was a banker before that. So I've had a variety of opportunities offered to me over the last 15 years or so.
Great, thank you. So what does head of regions mean in the ITFA context, I guess, local versus regional versus international? Can you explain some of the nuances and details?
Of course. So we have 11 regional committees at ITFA, and alphabetically that runs from Africa through to southeast, southern Europe, and geographically runs from the Americas through to Asia Pacific. So there's quite a range. They all do very different things, and of course each region has its, as you say, its own nuances. Some of them are geographically huge, so the Americas being an example. How can you do things in the Americas that work for all of the different types of ITFA members versus somewhere like VEFI, so the Swiss Forfaiting Association, as was, who are one of our other regions. Yeah. They're almost all either Zurich or Geneva based, and by extension geographically much more compact, and therefore their needs are different. And what we try and do is make sure we're servicing all of those respective needs that the members have in the regions, and that can be through organising events, educational seminars, it could be webinars, as has often been the case in the last 18 months or so. But in essence, it's trying to make sure that ITFA's central mandate of trying to bring together that trade and forfeiting world happens in a global sense, but the global and the local problems and global solutions, I guess, reflects the fact that everything is going to have to be tailored to that local necessity, but actually with a global umbrella, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess let's go into a little bit more detail, and I'm going to kind of quiz you on a few of the regions, perhaps. Let's start with the ITFA-ATFA merger. Tell me a little bit more about that.
So ATFA, the traditional, the Association of Trade and Forfaiting in the Americas, long been a sister association to ITFA. Predominantly Americas based, as the title would tell you, and we've been having discussions with them over a number of years as to whether it would make sense to join forces. And the Americas is an area where historically ITFA hasn't played too much, and conversely the rest of the world is the area that the ATFA team weren't. So there was a real there's a real synergy to be gained from coming together. Many ITFA members are also ATFA members historically, and of course vice versa. So real opportunity to leverage their expertise locally, and in particular they're very heavily New York focused, but obviously throughout the entire rest of the continent. And it was a labour of love, I guess, coming together. A lot of legal work done, more taxation implications than we probably would have guessed at the start. But ultimately, we've got there. ATFA is now effectively the ITFA Americas regional chapter. Really good local functioning board. They've just had their first in-person event in September in New York City. First event in the last 18 months, and it's really been great to see the energy that they had in the room, and hearing some of the stories of it. It brings back the ITFA's raison d'etre is networking and bringing people together, and that's what that's all about. So coming together enables them to leverage some of our scale, and also give access to the global nature of the business.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Let's talk about China. I mean, it's a bit of an elephant in the room conversation, but it's so important to global trade. Yet there's probably a bit of a lack of data. What's ITFA's involvement with trade and forfaiting in China?
So we have a Northeast Asian Regional Committee, which is based mainly out of China, and they're very good at pulling together events. Most of their events tend to be more forfeiting based. That's the predominant part of the industry that functions well there. We had an event in Beijing a couple of years ago. So Sean, the chairman, went out and got the red carpet treatment and presented. We've also done similar events with them in both Hong Kong and Singapore with our Southeast Asian Regional Committee, which again has a very strong nexus with China. And it's an area that we would like to do more, and it's certainly on the radar. We had one of our fellow board members is from the Bank of China and represents our Asian activities department, and it's very much on the radar to do something more with them over the coming 12 months.
Thanks, Chris. And what about the Middle East? They're clearly storming ahead with lots of initiatives, particularly in and around ports and digital trade.
So we rebooted our Middle East committee between 2018 and 2019, and it's going from strength to strength. It's been hugely active, membership's spiking. I think it's a real sign of the work that's going on in the region, both within trade finance, but actually also within the ITFA sphere. As you say, the activity has been varied. I particularly enjoyed seeing the fireside chat they had with ADGM and seeing the evolution of the fintech angle in particular that's really driving trade in the region. And so that regional committee is hugely active, as I say. They've just refreshed themselves as well in terms of they've had a shake-up of the personnel, and the new energy that brings is tangible.
Great, thank you. Now, let's talk a little bit more about, I guess, your other role, predominantly at Willis. You focus on short-term trade credit insurance, right? And what does that involve, and how has the pandemic impacted that?
So the role within Willis and also previously in my underwriting days was often around the short-term credit insurance space, so supporting predominantly bank clients who in turn are then supporting their own exporting clients by mitigating their risk in transactions. And that might be by enhancing their balance sheet treatment of a transaction. It might be around the capital utilisation, or it could just be around limits. I guess with the pandemic, there was probably a retrenchment of some sorts of some of the capacity available in the market. And we've seen that creeping back in, and actually I think we're probably back to the same levels we probably would have been in 2019 before COVID struck. The pricing spiked for a while, but then came back down again. And again, this is all driven by banks, and as much so by their exporting clients and what they're willing to pay, and inevitably supply and demand come into play. And if you can't make the two match, then you don't really have a business model. But at Willis, we are very much trying to bring banks to the market, help our clients find the right sort of underwriting capacity, and really be that conduit between the two.
Mm-hmm. And given that one of your products looks at single non-payment insurance, how has the pandemic impacted this?
So the single situation world is more of a client will bring a standalone transaction and look for some support on that. And as is ever the case, underwriters will look at a transaction on its merits. They'll seek to understand what is the risk, how is it structured, what is the tenor. And probably for the first part of the pandemic, as I say, capacity and interest had probably retrenched somewhat. Underwriters were looking to, or being less, probably risk, or less open to taking on more difficult risks than they might have been. I would say that's probably returned back to a more normal situation where underwriters are looking at transactions on their merits. They're trying to understand, does this fit within their agreed parameters, within their portfolio requirements? Mm-hmm. And as I say, I think we're back to a position where we're back to 2019 really in terms of flow of business and interest in that flow of business from the market.
Yeah. Chris, thank you very much, and I think really interesting insight, given that we're hopefully now seeing that rebound in trade back to 2019 levels. So it'll be really interesting to see how that continues to impact the TCI markets. And thank you very much also for your insights in terms of what's going on geographically in some of the, I guess, less looked at regions within the ITFA family. It's been a great insight. So thank you.
Thank you again for having me.